Right. We're so delighted to have this session. The work of a JIC we think is really important, and it's work in process, work in progress. We're looking forward very much getting a sense of where it's getting to and where it might be going. So let's just dive straight in. And I'd just love to get a sense of, Dan, why is this important? Why do you think that getting involved in this entity was going to be helpful to you and your business, but also to the wider market?
Sure. So I think it's fairly simple. It's a very complex problem, right? So the notion of how to measure modern media is obviously a very difficult thing. But I think the path to get there is somewhat simple. And I think it starts with a common set of requirements and sort of one voice. Historically, what's happened is you've had sort of all these new media measurement companies sprout up, and they go talk to all different publishers and all different agencies, and they hear a lot of different things. And it unfortunately points them in a lot, they have to be very reactionary because the market doesn't really speak as one. I mean, the closest they get is everybody wants cross-platform measurement. Well, the second you start scratching at that, that's like 8,000 different things. So for our point of view at Televisa Univision, I think the first thing is a common set of requirements, the industry speaking with one voice, and that common set of requirements that can be built against, I think that pushes things forward a lot faster. That's the first piece. And the second piece, again, sitting here from Televisa Univision, I think everyone can guess what it is, which is minority media measurement. That is wildly important. It, in our opinion, has been, I think, an afterthought in many of the conversations around alternative currency and the future of currency. We are very supportive of the use of big data, but we also need to understand that measuring devices only and using more of a convenience panel, that does create a lot of challenges, particularly around minority measurement. So we're always advocating for that, always pushing for that. That's a big reason why we want to be part of it.
Cool. Marielle, you're heading up new currency work at Omnicom. Why did you think it was so important to be involved in the work of the JIC?
Well, so to echo part one, at least, same thing, right? First and foremost, the JIC is a collaborative effort. What we're trying to achieve here cannot be realized, cannot be accomplished by one single entity. We need a united front in order to change and advance the way we do business in this market that pleases and benefits both buy side and the sell side. So teamwork makes the dream work, people. We know that, right? Second, we need transparency. We talked a lot about that in our earlier panel. We need to hold all of our platforms accountable for the information and the level of reporting, because our clients, my advertisers, they have a right to quality, control, transparency for their media buys. And we are hoping and we would like to ensure that the JIC and the goals and the tenets of the JIC are going to see that through. So transparency and collaboration.
Awesome. Brian, why does this stuff matter?
I agree with everything that's said so far, so I'll just go from a purely data research nerd perspective, which is just seeing this much momentum about getting good measurement done and really getting it to catch up with actual consumer behavior is super exciting. And so, I mean, everything that's been said so far, I completely agree with, but just having us all in the room to hash things out and actually move things forward is super important and exciting from my perspective.
Cool. So, Brittany, I know why you think it's important because of everything they said. So I want to hit you with the more important question, which is, it's not a JIC, man. It's a multi-currency certification committee. You've been subjected to trolling by individuals who are very, very keen and get very upset by the fact you're calling yourself a JIC. What's your take on this debate? I mean, are you deeply, deeply offended? Are you upset that they're offended? Are you sympathetic to their claims that it should be called a Duke or a Jock or a Mick or something else?
I've not heard those yet.
No, I just made them up.
Let's keep going maybe. So first I would say thank you for having us and thank you. This is a group of some of the most talented and smartest people in the industry, so appreciate the stage. You know, I think we as a collective industry have given lip service for so long to what needs to change. But the level of action that has happened in this year alone, I think, let the work speak for itself. If we can stop arguing about acronyms and what is or isn't a JIC, I think we'll all be better off for that and focus on getting the work done. I think, if we look at this room in its totality, each and every one of you in your various roles, past or current, have been responsible for launching new products, launching new things that required material change to the way that business was done. But individually, that's hard to do on your own. And so to echo some of my colleagues here on stage, coming together under the same tent to the same table to give equal voice to what needs to change and kind of taking that into our own hands. Ultimately, it's this group that is deciding how things are being transacted. And we have a responsibility to the end consumer and to the advertiser. And so the more that we can work collaboratively to drive consensus where consensus needs to be changed, I think collectively, that is how you drive transformation for the industry and how we'll all be better for it.
Being more serious for a moment, some of the questions obviously arise about the fact that what is happening with the US JIC feels different to the way JICs have operated in other geographies. And that's a fair question to ask. There's a reason why it's different, I think, in the US, which is that this is a unique and very different market. Give us your sense of what particular characteristics of the US market have led to this thing. I mean, one of obviously is that there was an interpretation of competition regulations which suggested that we couldn't do what other markets have done. It's also taken some time for everyone to come together, but now seemed like a good moment. But give us a little bit of history to the background and why it's come together the way it has.
Yeah, and JICs are not a new thing, right? They've been proven and have even been evolving in some of the international markets that have established JICs. I think they're even going through some of their transformation.
Sure.
So in the US, it is a messy, if you will, complex industry, right, when it comes to measurement. And we are not trying to anoint one currency. We are not trying to anoint one necessarily way of doing things. We are trying to enable multiple currencies and create a more competitive industry, right, in a more competitive marketplace. So just want to be clear, like, I've never spoken to as many antitrust lawyers as I have as part of this process, but that competition is critical.
It's coming from someone who works at OpenAP.
I know, shocking. I think, we're all in advertising here. I love a good slide, love good content, but I think at its core, we're trying to make sure that measurement keeps pace with the modern consumer. And so in terms of, and I think you'll get to a question on governance, but the JIC was established to be a not-for-profit separate new entity to make sure that we can successfully transition traditional legacy systems to a more modern way of measuring and reaching today's consumers. I think in this first year, some of the initiatives that we're focused on are both certification and looking at all new currencies. Even the incumbent has a new currency that's entering the market. So looking at them all, creating transparency and standards. And then while the certification is important and it's an incredible amount of work and time has gone into that, ultimately it's not the end, right? It's going to unlock a lot more, which is a second initiative on giving access to that first party data that we believe is part of the missing link of enabling that true cross-platform measurement.
And just very, very briefly, just to clarify, you mentioned specifically it's going to be established like other JICs as a not-for-profit. And secondly...
It has been.
It
is. It's done.
Big progress. Hooray. And then secondly, it's an inclusive group. I mean, it's not just sellers. We have agency groups and buyers involved as well.
Great segue to the next slide.
I love
Doesn't love a good logo slide. So yeah, I think initially it was a couple folks on the sell side who really said, let's do this in the US. But one of the first things that we did was invite our buy-side partners and the media agencies to join this. And it is, and I will leave it to the agency folks on the panel with us to give their point of view, but it is equal voice from both buyers and sellers. And right, we've got this full committee, which on some of our monthly calls, there's anywhere between 50 to 80 people who join these calls. It's hard to get work done in those environments. So we've created subcommittees, which is where the bulk of the decisions made and the bulk of the work happens. And in each subcommittee we create, we are very intentional on saying it's volunteer, but we need 4 agencies. We need 4 publishers so that both sides are equally represented.
And just briefly, you mentioned earlier governance. One of the complaints that some industry participants make in other geographies is that the JICs, people sometimes argue, can be slow to move because any one player on the JIC committee, the big TV sales houses, for example, can essentially block change. So it was sometimes argued by some industry participants that, for example, in the UK, some of the sales houses would block other players coming in because they didn't want to see their share diluted, as measured by Barb. How are we setting up governance here? How is the JIC being governed? Is it a voting, one vote for all type model?
Well, first, I don't think anyone would say that we've moved slowly.
No.
If anything, we've moved at breakneck speed. So from a governance structure, we have been working to get in place a more official board, and the board is responsible for determining funding, right? So as we look at the roadmap for the next year, where are we going to apply that funding and what new initiatives might we create on? Beyond that, though, to my point, the subcommittee is really the operating groups. Anything that's decided, we do hold a vote. When we went through the certification process, there was a vote that took place on who was going to move forward into that next stage. So that's really how we ensure it is equitable, and then that gets taken back for review to the broader committee.
Brian and Dan, you've both been involved. I'm going to come to Mary in a moment to talk about streaming data, but you heard Brittany talk a bit about the setup. Anything to add? I mean, you hear a lot of the noise around the work of the JIC. Brittany's given a pretty clear view, it seems to me, on the fact, as I see it, there's a lot of companies coming together to try and make stuff work better, and it should be applauded for that. Anything you'd like to add to what Brittany said about?
Sure. Yeah. So a couple of things. So the certification process gets a lot of press, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
But I honestly think the most important components of this, as part of that certification process, again, having a common set of requirements that people can build against, really important. And the other piece is the streaming data. And we didn't mention that to start, but we're sort of in an ecosystem now, unlike anything we've ever seen, where you have a handful of large publishers who now have an asset that is incredibly important in the future of media measurement, in our streaming data. And unfortunately, the way that we collect that data, the way that we aggregate that data, if you think about all of the technology, whether that's ad servers, whether that's stitchers, whether that's players, the way in which that data exists, even within our own walls, is highly, highly complex, and getting more and more complex as fragmentation continues, right? So I always joke around, like, the way that we distribute an app, like our streaming app in VIX, it is, there's like 300 different endpoints with slightly different technology, slightly different data roadmaps and loops back. So it's complicated just for us to get our own data in sort of the right shape to effectively give to somebody or share with somebody for measurement, let alone if you think about that across 6, 7 different major media companies. Ultimately, you include everybody in that, you're talking 50, 100 different publishers probably in that ecosystem. If the JIC can help standardize that, the amount of value that creates for the entire ecosystem is monumental. And then create the mechanism by which that can be shared back with third parties who can ingest that data and incorporate it with other assets like ACR data and set-top box data. That's the game. Like, that's the way you have to do this. You cannot measure CTV with panel-only data. It's not possible, right? And I think not to get into it, but I think everyone's intimately aware of what's happened with Thursday Night Football and changes that we've seen there. First-party data from publishers is an important asset. And if the JIC can force that function, and it is, I think that's how we start to solve some of the bigger challenges we have in measurement.
So I was going to love to bring in Mary at this point. As an agency executive who's been working in this space for a long time, you've heard Dan talk a bit about why starting with streaming data was so important. From an agency perspective, you think it was the right place to start?
Oh, 100%. I think when we talk about, when the industry talks about currency, they're almost always referring to exclusively traditional linear TV currency, right? But when we have to think of the world of video measurement, not linear measurement, right? And there is an abundance of inventory made possible by the shift of viewing from live linear to on-demand OTT. And all of that inventory is just as important to us as buyers as it is for live viewing on traditional TV. And we have to find a way to unlock that, right? And how we combine those two worlds in a seamless way when ads are served differently, content is distributed differently, is really hard, right? We know that. But the path forward is through a unified measurement solution. And the way to do that is with streaming data. Streamers historically, you would think you would have a ton of high quality data, and you do. They've just been historically not willing to share it, probably for obvious reasons because they don't know how to share it internally either, clearly. But we get it, right? Like, I asked for the keys for the kingdom. They're not going to fork over their most precious commodity. I understand that, right? Thankfully, today, there are ways to do so that's privacy safe, secure. I think one of the other big things of the JIC, and we mentioned this a million times before, or maybe it feels like a million times, but maybe just once, is standardization, right? the way linear and digital count impressions is different. We need to find a way to bring those two things together. I brought up transparency. As an agency, we need to hold streaming as accountable as we do with linear television. I need to know exact information on reach, frequency, where my ads ran, who saw those ads. It's the advertiser's right, we believe, that we have that information. And to Dan's earlier point around technology, tags aren't going to cut it, people. If your vendor's here and you're still working with tags, please let them go by way of the dodo. We need to figure out better ways to share data and have that data be accessible, because I need that granular reporting on behalf of my clients, right? OMG flexes and operates on the behest of those clients, and we need to be able to ensure that we get that same level of transparency. And when we think about what, this isn't just about will those streamers share data, right? What Dan's saying is right. Like, it's incredibly complex, right? What the JIC is hoping and is looking to do is to find ways, find that path forward for these streamers to share data to enable valid, standardized streaming metrics for cross-platform currency in a way that's comfortable for everybody, especially those streamers. And, I think that means there's a huge emphasis on data infrastructure, on clean rooms, because those are the ways that we're going to allow this access for streamers to be comfortable to do so, because we as buyers are waiting for it.
Brian, should we talk data infrastructure?
My favorite topic.
So I had the great pleasure of joining the JIC team for a delightful dinner in Cannes when the new data architecture was unveiled. And it's a piece of work. I mean, it's a fascinatingly deep, complex, and very different way of transacting against data. Tell us a bit about it. I appreciate it's a hard thing to describe at a high level, but what roughly does it consist of, and why have you gone that way as opposed to a different direction?
Well, I know Brittany could probably talk a little bit more in detail, but I will say I think the best technology we have today to be able to do this is clean rooms, right? So that's why we've leaned into that. And I think the idea is what we really want to accomplish is be able to pull out aggregated, anonymized data that we can use on both sides of the business to understand, where people are, where our ads are being served, what content's being watched. And meanwhile, making sure that the, for lack of a better word, sanctity of the data that the streamers are providing is not, sort of violated anyway. It's privacy safe, and that, we're in compliance with any kind of privacy regulations as far as that goes, so that everybody's comfortable that it's being done the right way and that we're getting, at the same time, getting the insights that we need.
Richard, Dan, and then Brittany?
So I was just, a couple of things that I think are important to keep in mind. The evolving privacy landscape, particularly from a legislative standpoint, is more complicated today than it was yesterday, and is going to be even more complicated tomorrow. There is literally new legislation being proposed. It feels like by the minute. And I think, unfortunately, it's often being written by people who have very little knowledge of how, particularly the advertising ecosystem, leverages data today. And anyone who watched, whether it was the TikTok CEO or when Mark Zuckerberg was in front of Congress, I mean, those conversations for people in this business were laughable, right? And just, it's important for us to understand that that's sort of the knowledge base that's driving all of this legislation, which does make things really complicated, right? What we're talking about here, I mentioned before, if you think about the data loops that the average publisher has for their CTV data, very complex across lots of different technology partners with this ever-evolving, legislative body and set of legislation around what we can and can't do with that. So it is a very complicated problem. I think, the solution that we put forward in leveraging clean room, I think it makes a lot of sense. But I also want to be really clear that the JIC's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. We're striving to be better. And I think, it's very easy, particularly in this business, to look over and throw shade and give the 40 reasons why it's not going to work and why it's not perfect. And it can't do this and it can't do that. But is it better? And that's all it takes. Like, we talk obviously with agencies all the time, and whether it's about media optimization, I mean, 5% better on a $60, $70 billion business, I'm cool with that. As we think about improving media measurement, if we think about those increments and incrementality of better, I think that needs to be the focus. We need to stop fixating on perfect. And we need to stop, announcing things as perfect. None of it's perfect. We're going to learn a lot of shit as we go through this. We're going to break a bunch of things. We're going to make a bunch of mistakes. We just got to keep getting better. And that's one of the things that I love about what we're trying to do within the JIC. It is a wildly inclusive group. I mean, I'm not on all of the calls. I try to be on all of them, but there's a lot of them. Like 4 or 5 sometimes a week, and some of them are 2 hours.
You
just keep going, and some of us are more talkative than others. But again, the beauty of this group is, trust me, it will take as much feedback, input, and time as you are willing to give. So I think that concept of better, you have, in my opinion, some of the best and the brightest involved in these conversations. And yeah, we're going to make some mistakes, but we are making things better. So it's a start.
All JICs do have that in common, I can confirm. Let's talk quickly about the scoring rubric. So there was some discussion about that. I thought most of the scoring rubric was relatively straightforward. There was one issue which I thought was interesting and some people latched onto, which was the weighting given to accreditation. And we had some discussion yesterday about whether there's a tension in the marketplace between JIC certification and MRC accreditation. Now, we all know they're very different processes, but again, just to simplify, how do you think about these two things sitting together? I don't know, Brittany, if you're desperately keen to avoid that question, but no, go for it. I think it's...
Do you want to start or?
Sure,
at least. Yeah, Brian.
I mean, I think the way that I look at it, and I think, we all talked about this in committee, is, it's with the JIC, we're really deciding whether this is a data set that we can do business on. It's all about transactability.
Right.
And, we want to take the MRC process into consideration, but it's a lengthy process, and with good reason, right? It's very thorough. But I think, for me personally, it's more important that these companies are engaged with the MRC and going down the path to accreditation, that they have it at the outset. And, we've all transacted on non-accredited data lots of times in the marketplace. So I think for me, it's about, a stepwise process to making the product as best as it could possibly be.
I mean, look, sorry.
Brittany a menu. Brittany a menu.
I absolutely agree and echo everything. But let's be clear that in the requirements that were published on March 1st, we have said that all measurement companies need and should seek accreditation, right? To your point, all of the companies here are transacting on these new currencies to some degree, and we can't let that hold us back from making key decisions that need to be made on readying operational and technology systems to be able to transact at scale. We have had several conversations. I don't know if George is here, but I mean, we've had a lot of collaboration on better articulating the role of accreditation versus certification. Candidly, maybe certification is confusing and it gets conflated. So understand and I have heard that feedback. But even I, in the work that I've done, I have seen some of the scores across the 4 buyers and 4 sellers who graded the RFIs. And candidly, all of them took that seriously and maybe didn't rank as highly in that category if companies weren't investing as they needed to. So it is critical. It is important. We ask and encourage and support the work that the MRC is doing, but we can't stop and we can't wait for the work that we need to do to be done.
Dan, sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's just I get very confused when I almost feel like, again, and that maybe this is just the industry wanting to stir shit up, but these are not competitive things. They're separate and distinct by design. What the JIC is attempting to do is, again, I'll try to not use jargon here, but how do you take a group of people who pay for all this shit and get us all to agree on what we want that shit to be? It's pretty straightforward, and that's not the role of the MRC to do that.
No, but it's worth saying, because I hear a lot of the, how do these things fit together? And I don't think it's people trying to stir things up. I think sometimes it is, perhaps. There are certain individuals who possibly are trying to stir things up. But I think a lot of people are just trying to understand and get clarity, because there has been a bit of we've all heard the noise. There's a lot of certification schemes get announced and people want to know how they fit together. So but
you absolutely need both of them.
Agreed. I totally agree.
Really important, right? Like if the JIC can set, again, that common set of standards, the MRC will provide, in an audit process and an accreditation process, which is wildly important.
Yeah, we're in violent agreement.
The problem is there are so many organizations that aren't even ready for that because they don't have a clear picture of what the industry wants. Because back to my first point, we all say different things. at different times. And that is wildly confusing. And why anyone who's worked in a product organization, I see there's a few of you out there. It is really hard when you have 10 different clients telling you to build 10 different things, 10 different times throughout the year. So again, as a forcing function for a set of standards, for a common set of requirements, that is required prior to anybody putting anything through an MRC process.
And I know you've got more questions, not a ton of time left, but if there's one last point that I can underscore, Dan, is that having both sides at the same table to collaborate and to find consensus where consensus is needed has been what has allowed us to make this amount of progress in the last 9 months. And I'm not going to go through everything, but if you look at, and just a couple of shout outs, the work that's been done between these two, between Mariel and Brian, and really helping us give feedback on the rubric. Helen Katz, I don't know if she's here, but she brought a level of academia view to designing of the rubric, right? As we look at the data evaluation process, Barad, Yi, Josh from the Group M team is designing what that data evaluation looks like, right? And then making sure that we work with Dan, with all of the other programmers who are included to make sure that it's balanced and can really, truly move from just lip service to moving the needle forward.
And you summarized something really important to me, which is why I had very little sympathy for the sort of JIC critics sitting on the sidelines. It's that I see a lot of very talented people working very hard to genuinely make stuff work better for the good of everybody, which I think is a good thing. Let's talk very quickly about a couple of the other little things which bounce around. One is just the membership question. So there are a few very obvious parties who are not yet part of the JIC. Some perhaps less surprisingly, some a bit more surprisingly. Do you expect that to change?
I do. And while I had a lovely logo slide, it's not everyone who we've been talking to. And I would say every company, there are a few known that we've talked to, right? Like everyone's at a different level of being able to commit publicly. But there are several, I won't name them on the record, who have been very active behind the scenes and really understanding, learning, participating, and giving feedback. From a measurement company standpoint, right? Like we want everyone to come under the tent with us. We want both large and small programmers. We have a streaming first programmer on there, right? Like we truly believe that we need equitable voice and perspective from the entire industry. And I think everyone's at a varying degree of willingness to be public with it, but rest assured, we have had a lot of participation from folks who aren't listed on that slide.
Cool.
I mean, has any organization ever started with everybody?
No. Well,
I think this is a hell of a start, and at that point, everyone's welcome.
Where there are simply fewer people. I mean, so in the UK, it's not that hard to start with everybody because there's not very many of us, trust you. It's a bit more straightforward. One question that I think is worth just touching upon briefly is the question about smaller players. So there is a cutoff. I have a personal, and the view sometimes here is smaller players have been cut out of the process. And I kind of think, well, that's kind of true in every JIC. There are smaller players in the UK market who do not have as much weight in those discussions as, say, ITV, Sky, or Channel 4. Over here, it's kind of the same. So is there any account taken for, say, small streamers? We had the ISA sort of folks on stage here earlier. Or is that, we'll get to that, but later?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there certainly is a mechanism for people to participate, whether that participation is formally with board seats and with investment. I think those are things that over time we need to figure out. But again, I sort of like the soul of the JIC is extreme inclusivity.
Right.
That is the opening position with everything.
Right.
We want everybody to participate, and we will find a way, one way, shape, or form for folks to participate, assuming they want to. I don't know if there's other stuff to add.
I mean, IAS, let's talk, right? Like if we're not already connecting, like let's certainly collaborate there.
Yeah, I think it's a fallacy that people think that you can't be part of it, right? Like I think to everybody's point, inclusivity is the basis of this, what we're trying to achieve. And I will echo that the JIC is not for the faint of heart, right? Like it's a commitment, right? Like and on top of your already packed days, but at OMG, at all of these institutions and organizations, we understand it's for the greater good. It's an investment that we're willing to make, but be it known that it's hard work. And it is, I just gave birth. I was at the hospital having a call with Brittany before I said,
that is the kind of level of commitment.
This is insane, but yes, I'm doing this, right? Like,
not a good luck to the JIC.
That was a Marielle choice. I will own that.
And I can
100%.
empathize. I've done similar, but I was also so delighted to see your email, like your first week back. I'm like, thank goodness she's back.
I don't know where to go with that. Final question, men. Nowhere, thankfully. But final quick question, men. Tell us a bit about, just a couple of words from each of you. Next year, what are the things... I've been saying to people for a while that there are kind of three things we all talk about when we're trying to fix stuff in the industry. We need more collaboration, we need interoperability, and could we ask the JIC to do that? And in terms of what the JIC is planning to do next year, streaming and getting that rolled out as the first thing, it's almost like we planned this. I love it. But in terms of other things, can you give us any insights into what 2024 holds in store? Brittany, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm going to focus on the next 2 quarters because a lot changes quarter over quarter. But I think at its core, it is transitioning ad measurement to keep pace with the modern consumer. We know that there's this deadline next September in which the legacy systems are being deprecated. So how do we ready the systems for that? Right. I've broken this down into 2 categories. Sorry for all the words on a slide, but I think on the certification front, a couple weeks ago, we announced conditional certification of 3 measurement companies. That is not full certification. We're now moving into a data evaluation stage. We've got meetings that have happened and are happening this week with the measurement companies to review that process with them and get feedback on what we hope to accomplish with that. Our goal is to be able to announce and be in a position to grant full certification early 2024. And then we're also looking at ways for those partners who are not going to be participating as a currency or don't want to be in that camp. How can we continue to create some certification or standards that allows them to also have access to the streaming data service? And that's really the end prize, if you were, the end goal here. And then I think more broadly, I won't go too deeply because this thing is flashing on the floor there, but we're intending at the beginning of the year to have a beta ready version of beginning of the year of 2024 of that streaming data service.
Look, the 4 of you, a massive thank you for giving us such a great deep dive into the work of the JIC. There's lots more materials available. I do just want to give a very quick personal shout out to Brittany, who I have to say, I think the work you're doing is incredible. You really are driving things, but also you've been a great friend, and it's been great to talk to you.
It is my privilege. I am just the one that gets to help bring everyone together, and thank you to this group and to everyone else in the room. I mean, it's tremendous.
Massive thank you all of you.